The Gyrfalcon was a ship held together by hope and salvaged wire. Captain Elara Voss stood on the bridge, one hand resting on a console that had been patched with hull plating from 3 different wrecks. The metal beneath her fingers was warm, almost alive, vibrating with the low thrum of engines that had no business still running. 50 years. 50 years since the Cataclysm had turned Earth into a scarred world, since the solar flares had cooked the colonies and sent humanity scrambling back to the home system like wounded animals crawling to a den. The galaxy had watched. The galaxy had judged. And the galaxy had moved on, leaving the survivors to pick through the bones of their own ambition. The Hygeia Belt glittered on the main display, a smear of rock and ice and mineral wealth that no one else had bothered to claim. It was perfect. Too perfect. Elara had learned to distrust anything that came easy. "Still nothing on the long-range arrays, Captain." Lyle's voice drifted from the science station, soft and distracted, the way it always was when he was buried in data. He was a thin man with eyes that seemed too large for his face, constantly scanning for patterns no one else could see. Just rocks and dust and more rocks. Elara nodded, not taking her eyes off the display. "Keep sweeping. The Draxis mapped this sector 2 cycles ago. They don't leave empty space behind." "The Draxis map everything," Bren said from the command station. Her first mate was a solid man, broad-shouldered and square-jawed, with the kind of patience that came from surviving things that should have killed you. "Doesn't mean they found anything worth taking." "It means they looked," Elara replied, "and I want to know why." The bridge fell quiet. The Gyrfalcon's crew was small, barely 24 souls, and they all knew the calculus of survival. Resources were scarce. Allies were non-existent. The galaxy was full of species that had watched humanity burn and done nothing. Trust was a luxury no one could afford. Lyle made a sound. It was small, almost swallowed by the ambient hum of the ship, but Elara caught it. She turned. "What?" "I don't know." He was frowning at his display, tapping at the screen with increasing agitation. "There's something, an energy signature buried in the 4th planetoid of the belt. It's not natural." Elara crossed to his station, leaning over his shoulder. The data scrolled across the screen in dense columns of numbers, but she didn't need to read them. The visual was clear enough. A pulse. Low frequency, perfectly rhythmic, cutting through the interference like a bell ringing in a silent room. "How long has that been there?" "Since we entered the system," Lyle said. "I thought it was a glitch. Bad sensor calibration, maybe a harmonic from the engines, but it's not. It's too clean, too consistent." "Can you identify it?" Lyle hesitated. That was rare. He was the kind of man who spoke in certainties, who would rather say nothing than risk being wrong. "There's a match in the archives, a partial match from the pre-Cataclysm database. It's called a void beacon." The name hung in the air like smoke. Elara felt something cold settle in her chest. "A what?" "A cross-dimensional transmitter," Lyle said, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. "The theory is that it can broadcast signals across dimensional boundaries, reach places normal communication can't. The technology is. It's ancient, Captain, far older than any known civilization, and it's powerful, unimaginably powerful." "How powerful?" Lyle met her eyes. "The archive suggests it could punch a signal through the event horizon of a black hole." The bridge went silent. Even the engines seemed to hold their breath. Bren stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Captain, you know what this means." Elara did. The Draxis hegemony claimed dominion over all presentient artifacts in their sphere of influence. It was one of the few rules they enforced with absolute merciless certainty. Find a relic, report it, surrender the system. That was the law. And the Draxis were not known for mercy. "If we report it, they take the system," Elara said slowly. "The Hygeia Belt, the Procyon system, everything. They claim the artifact and we get nothing." "We get to keep flying," Bren said. "We get to keep breathing." "For how long?" Elara turned to face her first mate. "We're barely scraping by as it is. The Gyrfalcon needs repairs we can't afford. The crew needs supplies we can't buy. If we lose this claim, we lose everything, and the Draxis don't share." "And if we don't report it?" Bren's voice was sharp, edged with frustration. "If we investigate and they find out, they'll destroy us. They'll destroy the ship. They might even use it as an excuse to move on Earth." "Earth's already been moved on," Elara said quietly. 50 years ago." The words landed like stones. Bren looked away, his shoulders dropping. He knew the argument was lost. He had known it the moment Lyle said the words void beacon. Elara turned back to the display. The pulse continued, steady and patient, as if it had been waiting for them. As if it had always been waiting. "Lyle, can you get me a surface scan? I want to see what we're dealing with." "Already running it." He pulled up a holographic model, rotating it slowly in the air. The planetoid was a chunk of rock no larger than a city block, pitted and scarred from eons of cosmic debris. But at its core, something gleamed. A structure of seamless black crystal, jutting from the stone like a shard of frozen night. "It's inert," Lyle said. "No active emissions, no power signature beyond the residual pulse, but the internal lattice is complex. I'm reading channels, conduits, something that looks like a storage matrix. There's energy trapped inside. A lot of energy." "How much?" He paused, enough to power the Gyrfalcon for 1,000 years. Bren let out a low breath. "Sweet stars." Elara stared at the artifact, her mind racing. This was the kind of discovery that changed everything. The kind that could lift humanity out of the gutter, give them leverage, give them hope. But it was also the kind that got you killed. She looked around the bridge, at Lyle hunched over his station, trembling with barely contained excitement. At Bren standing rigid, his fear warring with his loyalty. At the rest of the crew, their eyes filled with a hunger for more than just minerals. They were broken, all of them, survivors of a species that had been crushed and left for dead. But broken things could still be sharp. "We're going in," Elara said. Bren opened his mouth to protest, but Elara cut him off. "I know the risks, I know the Draxis, but I also know that if we turn away from this, we're admitting defeat. We're admitting that we're too scared to reach for something better." She met Bren's eyes, holding them. "I'm not ready to admit that, not yet." Bren held her gaze for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "I'll prep the landing team." "Thank you," Elara turned to Lyle. "Keep scanning. I want to know everything about that thing before we set foot on the surface." "Already on it," he said, his fingers flying across the console. Elara looked back at the display. The black crystal pulsed, steady and patient, waiting for them. She wondered what else was waiting. The calculus of certainty hung in the void like a shard of frozen thought, its crystalline hull catching the distant light of a dying star and fracturing it into 1,000 precise spectra. Commander Teshkar stood at the heart of the ship, in a chamber where walls of layered silicate glowed with slow, rhythmic pulses. He had served the Draxis hegemony for 237 of his 412 years, and in all that time, he had never encountered a situation that required an immediate decision. Every action was weighed across decades, every consequence traced through branching timelines of probability. This, however, was different. The intruder vessel sat at the edge of the Hygeia Belt, a crude assembly of metal and heat-leaking systems that screamed inefficiency to Tesh's calibrated senses. It had touched the beacon. Worse, it had activated dormant scanning arrays that had been silent for 14,000 years. The beacon was a relic of the old ones, a piece of technology so ancient that even the Draxis, with their century-long research cycles, had only mapped its outermost layers. To Tesh, this was not exploration. It was contamination, a filthy, careless pawing at something sacred and dangerous. He turned from the viewing pane, his scaled face unreadable. "Report the intrusion to the Hegemony Council," he said, his voice a low, dry rasp. "Flag it as a Tier 1 contamination event." His second-in-command, a younger Draxis named Soren Veth, hesitated. "Commander, the Council will take a cycle to deliberate. The humans will be gone by then." Tesh's eyes narrowed, the nictitating membrane sliding sideways in a gesture of cold amusement. "They are humans. They will not be gone. They are too curious and too short-lived to understand fear." He was correct, of course. The humans had not fled. They sat in their noisy, blunt machine, broadcasting a stream of raw data that cluttered the local spectrum like a child scribbling on a sacred text. Tesh made his decision. It was not a choice born of emotion because Draxis did not act on emotion. It was a calculation. The beacon was too dangerous to leave unguarded, and the humans were too unpredictable to ignore. He dispatched a single interceptor, a vessel of faceted energy prisms that unfolded from the calculus like a geometric flower blooming in reverse. It was fast, silent, and armed with enough concentrated phase energy to reduce the human ship to a cloud of glowing dust. The communication went out on all standard frequencies. It was cold, logical, and absolute. "This is Commander Teshkar of the Draxis Hegemony Border Fleet. The vessel you have approached contains technology classified under Galactic Statute 47 Alpha, proscribed artifacts of the old ones. You are in violation. Withdraw from this system immediately." Failure to comply will result in the application of lethal force. You have 12 of your minutes. Tesh watched the human ship through the interceptor's sensor feed. He expected panic. He expected a hasty retreat or perhaps a desperate plea for mercy. What he did not expect was silence, followed by a single compressed data packet. It contained every scrap of their scan of the beacon and a simple text query. "We wish to understand, do you?" Tesh stared at the words for a long moment. His translator module rendered the human language into precise Draxis script, but the meaning refused to resolve into a clean binary. It was not a surrender. It was not a challenge. It was a question, an invitation to a conversation that had no place in the protocols of galactic law. "This is irrational data spam," Soren Veth said, his crest flattening in confusion. "They are attempting to negotiate with raw information." Tesh did not answer immediately. He replayed the packet, analyzing its structure. The humans had sent everything. Their sensor calibrations, their power readings, their preliminary analysis of the beacon's energy signature. It was a gift and a trap and a plea, all wrapped in the same transmission. He had seen many things in his centuries of service. He had watched civilizations rise and fall, had catalogued the ruins of species that had reached for the stars and been consumed by their own ambition. But he had never seen a creature respond to a death sentence by offering to share its toys. The human ship did not flee. It sat there, waiting, its hull glowing faintly in the interceptor's targeting matrix. Tesh considered his options. The cleanest path was to destroy them. That was the law, the protocol, the calculation that minimized long-term risk. But the human query clung to his thoughts like a splinter. "Do you?" they had asked if he wished to understand. As if understanding were a choice, a desire, something other than a tool for survival. He activated the interceptor's comm. "Your query has been received," he said, his voice flat. "It is irrelevant. You have 9 of your minutes remaining." But he did not order the attack. Soren Veth stepped closer, his voice low. "Commander, the Hegemony Council will not approve of delay." "The Council will deliberate for a cycle," Tesh replied. "I have 9 minutes, I will use them." On the human ship, he could see a flurry of activity. Their bridge was a chaotic tangle of exposed wiring and jury-rigged displays, nothing like the serene geometry of a Draxis command center. He watched the humans move, their gestures quick and uncalculated, their faces betraying every flicker of fear and hope. One of them, a female with dark hair and a posture of exhausted defiance, stood at the center of the chaos. She was speaking, her mouth forming words that the translator rendered as, "Keep broadcasting, keep asking, make him look at us." Tesh looked at her. He looked at the beacon, dormant and patient, its secrets locked behind eons of silence. He looked at the data packet again, at the raw, unfiltered curiosity that the humans had offered like an open hand. He had 9 minutes. The calculation was simple. But for the first time in decades, Tesh Carr found himself wondering if there was a variable he had not accounted for. He opened a secure channel to the interceptor. "Hold position, do not fire, I am recalculating." Soren Veth stared at him. "Commander." Tesh did not answer. He was too busy reading the human data, searching for something he could not name. The clock was ticking. The Gyrfalcon held its breath. On the bridge, the silence stretched so taut that Elara Voss could hear the faint, rhythmic hum of the life support scrubbers cycling through recycled air. Every eye was fixed on the forward display, where the Draxis interceptor hung in the black like a polished fang. It had not fired. Its formation, perfect and crystalline, had flickered for less than a heartbeat. But Elara had seen it. She had spent 30 years learning to read the micro-expressions of a ship's hull, the subtle shifts in attitude that betrayed hesitation. That flicker, that moment of indecision, told her everything. The Draxis were used to prey that ran predictable patterns. They calculated trajectories, probabilities, and outcomes. They did not know what to do with a ship that did not flee. "They're waiting for us to break," Lyle said, his voice low and tight. The science officer's hands hovered over his console, trembling slightly. "Standard Predator protocol, they want to see if we bolt." Elara nodded slowly. "Then we don't bolt. Bren, bring us to full emergency power. I want every thruster hot." Bren turned from his station, his broad face creased with concern. "Full power puts us inside the beacon's gravity shadow, Captain. That planetoid has a nasty wobble. One wrong vector and we're paced on its crust." "Then don't give it a wrong vector," Elara said, and she almost smiled. "We're going to hug that rock like it's the last piece of solid ground in the galaxy." She could feel the crew's unease like a physical pressure in the room. They had all been children of the Cataclysm or had lost parents to it. They knew what it meant to gamble everything on a desperate move. But they also knew that running meant dying tired, a day or a week from now, when the Draxis finally caught up. "I need a plan," she said, turning to face Lyle and Bren. "Something that buys us more than a head start." Lyle's eyes went distant for a moment, the way they always did when he was chasing a theory down a dark hallway. "The beacon, we could activate it partially." Bren's jaw tightened. "Activate it? That thing could tear a hole in space. Or worse, it could broadcast our location to every null entity and Nohan in the void. We don't know what's listening." "We don't need a full transmission," Lyle said, his voice gaining speed. "A low-level activation pulse, just enough to create a localized dimensional shear. The Draxis ships run on energy sensors. Those sensors use crystalline lattices that read quantum fluctuations. A shear would scramble their readings like static on a comm line. They'd be blind for minutes." Elara considered it. The idea was mad. It was also the only card they had left. "How do we power it?" she asked. Lyle swallowed hard. "We feed a controlled burst from our slipstream engine into the beacon's crystal lattice. The engine's dark energy reserves are still at 60%. If we dump a fraction of that into the beacon, it should trigger a harmonic response." "Should," Bren repeated, his voice flat. "Or it could melt down the reactor and turn us into a cloud of atoms." "That's the other possibility," Lyle admitted. "The beacon's original builders used energy frequencies we don't fully understand. Our slipstream engine wasn't designed to interface with it. There's a real chance the feedback loop could destabilize both systems." Elara looked at the display again. The Draxis interceptor had not moved. It was still waiting, still calculating, still trying to understand why these fragile, broken humans were not running. "They think in centuries," she said quietly. "We have minutes, that makes us faster." She turned to face her crew fully. "We are not running. We are not hiding. We are going to make ourselves so unpredictable, so dangerous that they have no choice but to hesitate again and again until we find a way out of this system." Bren let out a long breath. "You're asking us to bet the ship on a theory." "I'm asking you to bet the ship on us," Elara said. "On the fact that we are better at surviving than they are, because we have to be." There was a long pause, then Bren nodded once, sharp and final. "All right, I'll route the engine feed to the cargo bay. Lyle, you'd better be ready to calibrate the pulse." Lyle was already pulling up schematics on his console. "I need 10 minutes to run the harmonic calculations. After that, we have a window of maybe 30 seconds to initiate the feed. Then we have 9 minutes and 50 seconds before that interceptor makes a decision," Elara said. "Get to work." The next 8 minutes were the longest of her life. The Gyrfalcon moved, sliding into the planetoid's gravity well with the careful grace of a dancer on a knife's edge. Elara kept her hands on the manual controls, feeling the subtle drag of the planetoid's uneven mass through the ship's frame. Bren called out course corrections in a low monotone, his eyes fixed on the threat display. The Draxis interceptor tracked them, its weapon systems cycling through readiness states, but it did not fire. They were still waiting. Elara understood that waiting now. It was not mercy, it was confusion. The Draxis had never encountered a species that treated self-preservation as a secondary concern. They did not know how to read a creature that would rather burn bright for a moment than fade slowly into extinction. In the cargo bay, Lyle worked feverishly, running cables from the slipstream engine's emergency feed to the beacon's exposed crystal lattice. The beacon sat in the center of the bay, a monolith of dark, faceted stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Every time Lyle touched it, he felt a faint vibration in his bones, like the hum of a tuning fork held against a cathedral bell. "Ready," he said over the comm, his voice strained. "But I need to warn you, when this thing wakes up, it's going to feel wrong. The dimensional shear will affect the ship's gravity plating. Things are going to get strange." "Define strange," Bren muttered. I don't know what words to use." Elara took a breath. She looked at the timer on her display. 30 seconds until the Draxis ultimatum expired. "Do it," she said. Lyle pressed the activation sequence. The Gyrfalcon screamed. Not the crew, the ship itself. The hull groaned as forces that did not belong in real space twisted through its frame. The lights flickered and died, then came back a different color, a deep, bruised purple that made Elara's teeth ache. The gravity plating surged and dropped, leaving her stomach floating for a sickening second before slamming back into place. On the display, the Draxis interceptor's signature wavered. Its energy readings spiked and then flatlined into noise. "It worked," Lyle said, his voice thick with disbelief. "The shear is scrambling their sensors. They're blind." "For how long?" Elara asked. "Maybe 5 minutes, maybe less." "Then we move," she said, and she pulled the Gyrfalcon hard around the planetoid's dark side, using the gravity well to slingshot them toward the edge of the Hygeia Belt. The ship shuddered and groaned, but it held. Behind them, the Draxis interceptor hung in the black, its formation broken, its sensors useless. For the first time in 4 centuries, Commander Teshkar did not know what to do. And in that moment of hesitation, the humans were gone. The calculus of certainty hummed with the low, constant thrum of a ship designed for patience. Its corridors were wide, its surfaces a muted, polished gray, and its air carried the faint, clean scent of recirculated atmosphere. Everything about the vessel spoke of a species that had solved the problems of haste centuries ago. Commander Teshkar stood at the primary observation array, his claws resting lightly on the crystalline console. The display showed the Hygeia Belt in exquisite, layered detail. And there, impossibly, sat the human ship. The Gyrfalcon. It was still there. His tactical projections scrolled across a secondary screen, a cascade of probabilities that had all converged on a single, elegant conclusion. The humans would flee. They would calculate the odds of survival against a Draxis interceptor, reach the correct answer, and withdraw. The probability was 99.8%. Tesh's jaw tightened. The ship had not fled. It glowed now with an unstable, flickering energy signature, a dirty light that pulsed from its hull like a sick heartbeat. The beacon. They had done something to it. He replayed the data packet they had sent. The question. "We wish to understand, do you?" It was a paradox, a gesture that had no tactical value, no survival logic. He had dismissed it as a primitive error, a failure of their underdeveloped minds to grasp the gravity of their situation. He was wrong. The beacon pulsed. Tesh felt it before his instruments confirmed it. A wave of something not quite light, not quite pressure, washed outward from the human ship. It passed through the calculus of certainty like a ghost through a wall. No damage, no impact. But the primary sensor array, the long-range crystalline lattice that was the ship's eye, went dark. The display flickered, stuttered, and collapsed into a field of static. He had gone blind. A low hiss escaped his throat, a sound of pure reptilian frustration. This was not combat. This was not a weapon. This was a tactical nuisance, a brief, annoying disruption. But the philosophical weight of it pressed down on him with a force far greater than any explosive. The humans had not understood the beacon. They had not worshipped it or feared it or sealed it away in reverence. They had taken a relic of the old ones, a thing of sacred mystery, and they had used it. They had twisted it into a tool. His claws scraped against the console. There was no algorithm for this, no protocol. The Draxis had spent 400 years cataloging the relics of the ancients, building a doctrine of careful, reverent study. Never once had they considered that a lesser species would simply turn the key. Soren Veth's voice cut through the silence. "Commander, the beacon's active state has triggered a secondary broadcast, an automatic homing signal." Tesh's head snapped toward his second-in-command. "Show me." A new display appeared, a long-range sensor sweep that reached far beyond the Hygeia Belt. A single point of light, impossibly distant, had changed. It was a rift, a tear in the fabric of normal space, yawning open like an eye. And something was coming through. Tesh's blood, a thick, cool fluid that regulated his body temperature, seemed to slow in his veins. The signature was unmistakable. It had no mass, no energy signature in any known spectrum. It was a void, a perfect absence of everything, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. A null entity. He had never seen one. No Draxis had, not in living memory. They were myths, stories told to hatchlings to explain the empty spaces in the galaxy. They were the ancient ones, the ones who had built the beacons, or perhaps the ones who had buried them. They were indifferent, and they were coming. His mission parameters shifted, the weight of them pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. Quarantine was no longer possible. The humans had not only activated a relic, they had rung a dinner bell for a god. He opened a channel to the human ship. His voice, when it came, was stripped of the cold certainty that had defined him for 4 centuries. It was edged with something he had not felt in a very long time. "Urgency." Human vessel, you have triggered a protocol. A non-corporeal entity is approaching. Your actions have doomed this system. He expected panic. He expected pleas or accusations or the desperate static of a ship trying to flee. He expected despair. The channel crackled. A voice came through, calm and steady. It was Captain Voss. Can it be stopped? Tesh's mind went blank. The question was so direct, so absurdly practical that it shattered every framework he possessed. She was not apologizing. She was not bargaining. She was asking for the next step. He looked at the display again. The rift was growing. The nullentity was coming. And for the first time in his long, calculated life, Tesh did not have an answer. He closed the channel for a moment, letting the silence of the bridge wash over him. Soren Veth was watching him, waiting for an order. The crew of the Calculus of Certainty was motionless, their analytical minds searching for a solution that did not exist in any database. Tesh opened the channel again. I do not know, he said, and the words felt like ash in his mouth. But the records of the old ones mention a resonance frequency, a pattern that could calm them. It was never tested. Captain Voss's voice came back without hesitation. Then we test it. What do you need from us? Tesh stared at the static-filled display where the Gyrfalcon should be. He was looking at a species that had just broken every rule, defied every probability, and called down an ancient horror. And now they were asking what they could do to help. He had spent 412 years believing that the galaxy was a place of order, that every action had a predictable reaction, that survival was a matter of correct calculation. The humans had just proven him wrong. And for the first time, he was grateful for it. Send me your scan data, he said, his voice finding a new kind of steadiness. All of it, every reading you took from the beacon, we will find this resonance frequency together. The channel went silent for a moment. Then the data packet arrived. It was crude, incomplete, and full of gaps. It was also the most valuable piece of information Tesh had ever received. He turned to Soren Veth. Prepare the harmonic resonator and tell the crew that we are no longer enforcing quarantine. Soren's eyes widened. Commander, the Council. The Council can deliberate, Tesh said, a hint of the old, dry certainty creeping back into his voice. We have a god to appease. He looked at the display one last time. The rift was closer now. The void was coming. But for the first time, Tesh was not afraid. He was curious. The Gyrfalcon's bridge had become a tomb of flickering emergency lights. Alarms painted the bulkheads in pulsing amber and red. Elara Voss stood with both hands braced against the navigation console, her knuckles white, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The rift was growing. It looked like a crack in the universe, a wound that bled nothing at all. A communication channel opened. Teshkar's voice came through, stripped of its earlier cold confidence. He sounded old. Captain Voss, we must talk now. Elara exchanged a glance with Lyle. The science officer shrugged, his face pale and slick with sweat. She tapped her earpiece. I'm listening, Commander. The Draxis appeared on the main viewer. His reptilian face was drawn tight, his scales carrying a faint iridescence that flickered with the ambient glow of his own bridge. He looked like a creature who had spent centuries believing in the solidity of the universe, only to watch it crack open. The beacon is not merely a transmitter, Tesh said. It is a lock, one of many placed by the old ones to seal the boundary between our dimension and the void. Elara nodded slowly. A locking mechanism, so we picked the lock, now what? Tesh's jaw tightened. The null entities are beings of pure entropy. They consume order, structure, life. They do not hate us. They simply dissolve anything that has form the way fire consumes dry grass. The rift you opened is a gate. They will arrive through it in approximately 14 minutes. Lyle let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. Bren, standing near the engineering station, said nothing. He was already running calculations on a handheld slate, his thick fingers moving with surprising speed. There is a solution, Tesh continued. The beacon can be collapsed safely if we overload it with a coordinated energy surge. My fleet is positioning for a phased resonance cascade. The process requires precise alignment of 6 vessels. It will take 3 hours to complete. Elara stared at him. 3 hours, you have 14 minutes. The alternative is a system-wide sterilization event. My fleet will survive if we retreat to slipspace. Your vessel will not. I am offering the only plan that preserves the Hygeia Belt for future occupation. She understood then. The Draxis were planning for the peace that would come after the disaster. They were treating this as a strategic problem with a long-term solution. They were not planning to survive the next hour. They were planning to inherit the ashes. Elara turned away from the viewer and walked to the center of the bridge. Her boots clicked against the deck plates. The sound was loud in the silence. "You're wrong," she said quietly. Then louder. "You're wrong, Commander. Your plan is beautiful. It's meticulous. It's also useless because in 40 minutes there won't be a system left to save." Tesh's brow ridges lowered. "What do you propose?" She looked at Bren. The engineer met her gaze without flinching. He was a heavy man, broad-shouldered, with burn scars on his forearms from a reactor accident that should have killed him 10 years ago. He had survived the Cataclysm as a child, crawling out of a collapsed bunker with degree burns and a dead sister in his arms. He understood sacrifice the way the Draxis understood mathematics. "The Gyrfalcon's slipstream core," Elara said. "It's a dark energy reactor. If we modify it into a directed implosion device and fly it into the rift as it opens, the resulting collapse could seal the tier." Tesh's voice rose, sharp and incredulous. "That is suicide. Your survival probability is 0.03%. You would destroy your vessel, your crew, and waste valuable technology for a statistical impossibility." "You see a percentage," Elara said, turning back to face the viewer. "We see a chance." Bren stepped forward. His voice was rough, the voice of a man who had spent too many years breathing recycled air and yelling over engine noise. "I'll pilot it. The core modification takes one person. The rest of you can take the escape pods, get clear before the implosion wave." "No," Lyle said, his voice cracking. "Bren, that's insane. You heard him, 0.03%. "I heard him," Bren said. "He's still counting. Humans stopped counting a long time ago." Elara crossed to him and put her hand on his shoulder. The muscle was hard as iron. "You don't have to do this." "I know," Bren said. He smiled, a tired, crooked thing. "That's the point." On the viewer, Teshkar watched them with an expression that might have been horror. His second-in-command, Soren Veth, appeared beside him, his own scales pale with distress. "Commander," Soren said, "the humans are preparing a suicide run. They intend to use their ship as a weapon." "I can see that," Tesh said quietly. He stared at Elara through the screen. His eyes were ancient, layered with centuries of calculation and certainty. For the first time in 400 years, those eyes held something unfamiliar. Confusion, yes, but beneath that, a fragile, dawning awe. "You would spend a life," he said slowly, "for a possibility." "Every human who ever built anything did the same," Elara replied. "Every bridge, every vaccine, every ship that left Earth. We don't build for certainty, we build because we hope." Tesh was silent for a long moment. The rift on the tactical display grew wider. A shimmer of nothing crawled across its edges. "We have spent millennia perfecting our survival," he said at last. "We calculate, we preserve, we do not waste what we cannot replace. But you spend lives the way we spend fuel, as if they are renewable." "They are," Elara said, "as long as we keep making more, and as long as the ones we lose mean something." Bren was already moving toward the engineering hatch. He paused at the threshold and looked back. "Captain, if I don't make it, tell the next crew the Gyrfalcon died doing something worth remembering." "You'll tell them yourself," Elara said. Bren laughed. It was a warm sound, out of place in the cold tomb of the ship. "You always were a bad liar." He disappeared through the hatch. Elara turned back to Tesh. The Draxis commander was still watching her, his face unreadable. Behind him, the bridge of the calculus of certainty hummed with the quiet activity of 100 officers who had no idea what to do. "Commander," she said, "we don't have time for a treaty, but if you want to understand humanity, watch what happens next. This is who we are. This is what broken things do when they refuse to stay broken." Teshkar inclined his head. It was not a bow, it was something smaller, an acknowledgement, a surrender. "I will record this," he said. "I will ensure the Draxis hegemony understands." "Good," Elara said. "Now get your fleet clear. We're about to make some noise." She cut the channel and turned to Lyle. The science officer was shaking, but he was still standing, still working. "Get to the escape pods," she said. "That's an order." "Captain..." "Lyle, go." He opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded. He moved toward the pod bay with the heavy steps of a man carrying a weight he could not name. Elara stood alone on the bridge of the Gyrfalcon. The alarms continued their mournful song. The rift yawned on the display, hungry and patient. She touched the ship's console, a gentle press of her palm against the cold metal. "You were a good ship," she said. Then she followed her crew to the pods, leaving Bren to his work, leaving the Gyrfalcon to its final duty, leaving a piece of herself behind in the heart of the machine. Behind her, the slipstream core began to sing a note of pure destruction. The void opened like an eye that should never have been opened. It was not a ship, it was not a creature. The null entity was a storm of silent darkness, a patch of space where starlight simply refused to exist. Light bent around it, streamed into it, and vanished. The Hygeia Belt's distant sun dimmed as if the thing had taken a bite out of the sky. Commander Teshkar gripped the rail of his command platform. His claws clicked against the crystalline surface. All weapons, fire at will. The Draxis fleet responded with precision born of centuries. 8 ships, each a shard of living crystal, unleashed lances of coherent energy. The beams struck the darkness and did not reflect. They did not scatter. They simply stopped, absorbed into a hunger that had no bottom. Soren Veth's voice came from the tactical station, strained but controlled. Yield reduction, 3%. Tesh's jaw tightened. Maintain fire, overload the emitters if you must. The null entity did not react to the barrage. It did not accelerate or decelerate. It simply continued its slow, inevitable drift toward the system's inner worlds, toward the beacon, toward everything. On the Gyrfalcon, Elara Voss watched the numbers climb on Lyle's display. Her ship was stripped now. Bren had jettisoned every non-essential system. The cargo bay doors were welded shut. The life support had been reduced to a single scrubber unit. Every spare joule of energy was being fed into the slipstream core. Bren sat in the pilot's chair, his hands steady on the controls. He did not look back at the captain. "Core at 97%, Lyle said. "She's ready." Elara walked to Bren's side. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this." Bren turned to look at her. His face was calm. "I know, but I'm the best pilot we have, and you know that too." She did not argue. She could not. The Gyrfalcon detached its final umbilical. The salvaged ship, once a wreck held together by hope and salvaged wire, now flew toward the dark storm. It was a fragile thing. Scrap metal, patchwork plating, a core that would become a bomb. Tesh saw the tiny vessel separate from the human mothership. He understood immediately. They are making their run. Soren Veth's voice dropped. "Sir, our projections give that ship a 3% chance of reaching the rift center." Tesh watched the Gyrfalcon accelerate. They do not care about the projection. He made a decision. It took less than a second. Divert all forward shield energy to our port array. Project a barrier along the Gyrfalcon's approach vector. Soren Veth stared at him. "Commander, that will leave our forward batteries at 15%. We will lose our ability to suppress the entity." Tesh did not look away from the screen. "Do it." The Draxis command ship shifted. Its shields, designed to deflect energy and debris, bloomed into a wall of light between the null entity and the tiny human vessel. The darkness struck the barrier and began to eat through it. Cracks of pale blue light spiderwebbed across the shield's surface. But it held. Inside the Gyrfalcon, Bren saw the shield appear. He did not have time to wonder why an alien commander had just chosen to protect him. He had 5 seconds. "Core at 100%, Lyle transmitted. "Detonation sequence armed. You have to pull out now, Bren." "No," Bren said. "I'm already past the threshold." Elara's voice cracked over the comm. "Bren." "Captain, I'm not coming back." The Gyrfalcon plunged into the null entity. The darkness swallowed the ship whole. For a moment, nothing happened. The storm continued its drift. The Draxis shields continued to crack. The silence stretched into an unbearable eternity. Then the slipstream core detonated. There was no sound. There was only a violent reversal of light. The darkness that had consumed the ship suddenly inverted. A flash of white, so pure it burned through every sensor, every eye, every consciousness in the system. The rift sucked inward. The storm collapsed into a single point of nothing, and then that point vanished. Silence. Absolute perfect silence. On the bridge of the calculus of certainty, Teshkar stared at the empty space where a starless patch had hung moments before. It was gone, but something remained. A scar on reality. A faint distortion like a lens of warped glass where the fabric of space had been torn and hastily stitched back together. The null entity was gone. Soren Veth's voice was barely a whisper. It worked. Tesh did not answer. He could not speak. His sensors detected movement. A small drone, one of his own reconnaissance units, was returning from the blast zone. It carried something in its grasp, a blackened metal box, scorched and twisted but intact. The drone docked. Tesh ordered the box brought to the bridge. It was a human data storage unit, a black box. The technician said it still held a fragment of transmission. Tesh ordered it played. The speaker crackled, static, then a voice. Bren's voice, calm, steady. "Tell my people we held the line." The transmission ended. Tesh stood in the silence of his bridge. His crew watched him. They waited for orders. They waited for analysis. They waited for the cold logic that had defined his command for 4 centuries. He gave them none. Instead, he turned to the screen. The scar in space hung there, a wound, a monument. The human had not died for victory. Victory was uncertain. He had not died for glory. Glory was meaningless to a corpse. He had died for duty, duty that required no reward, duty that demanded no recognition, duty that was its own justification. Tesh had spent 400 years calculating probabilities. He had measured every action against its expected outcome. He had weighed risk against reward. He had never once considered that an act of pure sacrifice could be rational. But it was the most rational thing he had ever witnessed. Because the human did not ask what the outcome would be. He asked only what was required of him. Tesh closed his eyes. When he opened them, he spoke. "Send a message to the Draxis Council." Soren Veth looked up. "Sir, tell them we have encountered a species that does not calculate. Tell them we have encountered a species that chooses." He paused. "Tell them we have encountered a species that terrifies me." The bridge was silent. The scar in space glowed faintly. Somewhere on a salvaged ship named Gyrfalcon, a captain wept for her engineer. And the galaxy changed. The shuttle was a wreck. Tesh observed this with clinical precision as he floated through its docking ring, his claws gripping the handholds designed for smaller, softer beings. The hull bore the scars of atmospheric re-entry, radiation scorching, and what appeared to be ballistic impact from debris. It was a minor miracle the life support functioned at all. A human woman waited for him in the central compartment. She stood rather than sat, her posture rigid with exhaustion, her flight suit stained with hydraulic fluid and something darker. This was Captain Elara Voss. She looked nothing like the commanders of the Hegemony fleet. She looked like a survivor. Commander Tesh inclined his head, a gesture of respect he had not offered another being in over a century. "Captain, thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Elara Voss studied him with eyes that missed nothing. "Your people have a funny way of asking for things, Commander. You sent a shuttle with a message that said compliance is requested." "That sounds like an order to me." "It was phrased as a request," Tesh said, and he heard the defensive note in his own voice. He had not intended it. "I am not here to issue commands." "Then sit down." She gestured to a cracked acceleration couch. "I've been standing for 30 hours straight. My body is reminding me I'm not 25 anymore." Tesh folded himself into the seat opposite her. The compartment was small, barely larger than his personal meditation alcove aboard the asterisk calculus of certainty asterisk. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, burnt insulation, and something else. Grief. He recognized it from old war recordings. "I have reviewed the data from your vessel's final approach," he said carefully. "Your engineer, Bren, he understood the probability of survival was 0.003%. He chose to proceed anyway." Elara Voss did not look away. He knew. Why? The word escaped Tesh before he could filter it. He had spent 412 years perfecting emotional discipline. This human had undone it in 6 hours. "Your species possesses self-preservation instincts. We have studied your biology. The amygdala functions identically to ours. The fight-or-flight response is identical, and yet your officer willingly flew into certain death. The calculations do not align." Elara Voss smiled. It was not a happy expression. It was the smile of someone who had seen too much and was too tired to pretend otherwise. "Bren had a daughter. She lives in a settlement on Titan. She's 8 years old." Tesh processed this. Proximity-based genetic investment does not override the survival imperative. We have modeled this. "We're not a model, Commander." She leaned forward, and her voice carried a weight that made Tesh's scales prickle. "Bren didn't die because he didn't value his life. He died because he valued hers more. That's the bargain we all make, every human, every day. We look at the people we love, and we decide they're worth dying for." Silence filled the compartment. Tesh's mind raced through probability matrices, historical analyses, sociological projections. None of them captured what he had just witnessed. None of them explained why a being would voluntarily cease to exist for an abstract future that might never come. "You consider this a weakness," Elara said quietly. "Don't you? A flaw in our logic, a failure of the survival instinct." "I did," Tesh paused. "I am no longer certain." He reached into his satchel and withdrew a data slate, its surface etched with hegemony authorization seals. "I have filed my report with the Council. The beacon has been destroyed. The null entity has been neutralized. The Hygeia Belt is now classified as a high-risk zone requiring specialized guardianship." Elara's eyes narrowed. Guardianship by whom? By those who have demonstrated the capacity to respond to void threats with decisive action. Tesh met her gaze. "I have recommended a joint human Draxis custodianship of the region. Your vessel will be granted salvage rights to the beacon's remains. Your colony claim will be recognized." She stared at him. Why? It was a fair question. Tesh had asked himself the same thing during the long journey to this shuttle. He had no elegant answer. "Because the hegemony calculates, we measure risk, reward, probability, and outcome. We have done so for millennia. It has made us safe. It has also made us stagnant." He paused. "Your species does not calculate. You act, you sacrifice, you burn yourselves to ash for things that do not exist yet. This terrifies me." "Good," Elara said. Tesh blinked. "Good." "It should terrify you." She stood, her movements slow and deliberate. "Because we're not broken, Commander. We're not wounded animals waiting to be put down. We're the species that crawled out of a near-extinction event 50 years ago and said, 'Is that all you've got?' We're the species that looks at a null entity and flies a ship into its heart because the alternative is unacceptable." She stepped closer, and Tesh felt something he had not experienced since his first command. Apprehension, not fear of violence, fear of understanding. "You calculate probabilities," she said. "We calculate meaning, and meaning doesn't fit in your equations." Tesh rose to his full height. In the cramped shuttle, his horns nearly scraped the ceiling. "Your officer, Bren, he knew he would die. Did he not value his life?" Elara Voss smiled that broken smile again. "He valued what comes after his life more. That's the bargain we all make." The words hung in the air, heavy as neutronium. Tesh felt something shift in his chest. A calculation he had run 1,000 times, returning the same result, had suddenly changed its variables. He did not know the new answer yet. He suspected he would spend the rest of his long life searching for it. "I must return to my vessel," he said. "The Council will expect a full debriefing." "Of course they will." Elara extended her hand. It was a human gesture, an offering. Tesh took it. Her grip was firm, her skin warm against his scales. She did not flinch at his touch. She did not back away. "Thank you, Commander," she said, "for seeing us." He released her hand and turned toward the airlock. At the threshold, he paused. "Captain, the galaxy believes your species is broken, a wounded animal licking its wounds in the dark." "I know. They are wronged." Elara Voss did not reply. She simply watched him leave, her eyes holding something Tesh could not name. He carried that unanswered question back to the asterisk calculus of certainty asterisk, through its crystalline corridors, past his subordinates who bowed and averted their gazes. He climbed to the observation dome and stood alone, watching the human shuttle drift away. It was a wreck, patched hull, flickering thrusters, radiation scars. It looked like something that should have died long ago. It flew anyway. Teshkar pressed his palm against the transparent crystal and watched the tiny vessel disappear into the darkness. He thought of Bren, the engineer who had flown into certain death. He thought of Elara Voss, who had lost a crewmate and kept moving. He thought of a species that had survived extinction and emerged not cautious, not broken, but burning. The galaxy believed humanity was a wounded animal. Tesh watched the shuttle's engines flare one last time before the void swallowed it. He understood now. Humanity was a phoenix, forever burning itself to ash so it could rise again. And in a stagnant, calculating galaxy, that made them the most dangerous species of all. It also made them necessary. Commander Teshkar lowered his hand and turned away from the observation dome. He had reports to file, a council to convince, and a new variable to add to every calculation he would ever make again. The humans had taught him something today, something that could not be measured in probabilities. He would spend the rest of his life trying to understand it. And for the first time in 400 years, Teshkar was grateful that his life was long.